Hola chicos y bienvenidos a otra presentación gramatical que presenta los dos tiempos pasados que hemos visto en este curso, el pretérito y el imperfecto. ¿Qué hiciste ayer? Bueno, para empezar, esta pregunta tiene un verbo y todos los verbos en este ejemplo vienen en el pretérito. Hiciste, trabajé, fui, tuve, ¿no? Estamos hablando de las actividades de ayer, ¿no? De ayer. Entonces son actividades muy específicas. Esta es la diferencia fundamental entre el pretérito y el imperfecto. El pretérito se usa para acciones específicas, chicos, muy específicas. No por eso, ayer por la mañana trabajé, por la tarde fui a mi casa y por la noche tuve que corregir unos exámenes. Tres actividades específicas completadas en el pasado. En cambio, esta pregunta refiere al pasado, ¿no? Porque tenemos esta referencia de niño y el mismo verbo hacer en la pregunta, pero no es el pretérito. Aquí tenemos el imperfecto, que hacías. Y este tiempo, o el imperfecto, se usa para actividades generales o, mejor dicho, habituales que se hace en el pasado, ¿no? Entonces, repetidas, ¿no? Habituales, continuosas, diferente del pretérito. El pretérito es para acciones específicas que solo ocurrieron una vez, ¿no? Por eso empiezo mi respuesta con: de niña iba a la casa de mis abuelos, comía muchos dulces y jugaba al fútbol, repetidas, ¿no? Durante toda mi niñez. ¿Entienden la diferencia entre el pretérito e imperfecto? Es muy importante que ahora tienen un entendimiento muy claro entre los dos tiempos, ¿ok? Si no, hablen conmigo inmediatamente, ¿ok? Porque ahora nosotros vamos a conocer cómo se usan los dos para narrar en el pasado, para contarle una historia que ocurrió en el pasado, la narración, ¿ok? Y por eso, típicamente en español usamos el pretérito y el imperfecto. Y vamos a empezar aquí y voy a hablar un poquito inglés para que esté muy claro. So, like I was saying, preterite, specific actions, imperfect, repeated, habitual, general, continuous actions. Today, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to use both the tenses because we use both the tenses when we narrate in the past. Obviously, we need to be able to talk about what happened on a certain day and time, or what was going on at a certain, time or day, or what I was doing or what I used to do, different uses. So if you look on Oaks under content, I have this story written out and what you really need to do to really understand this. And if you do this, the concept's not going to be that hard. And it's really important that you do this, because if you don't, then it's really hard to understand. This is pretty abstract. So if you look under content, under grammatica, there's notes for the preterite and the imperfect, and you can follow along on those notes, and you can take notes on what I'm saying as I read through this story. And you can also, if you look at the second page of that document, that Word document on Oaks, I have a chart with the imperfect and the preterite. So, because I'm going to talk about when we use each one and specific examples, because linguistically, that's how we learn language. We read, we hear, and then we start to produce these concepts. I mean, that's what you do as a child. You're not born speaking. Everybody's talking around you, and then you finally, articulate something because people have been talking to you all along. So obviously, I can't spend 3 years of your life speaking Spanish to you to just start talking Spanish yourself, but you can at least look at all these uses of the preterite and perfect in context, because that is how we learn language, through context. Grammar is pointless if we don't have context. And the context today is telling a story about getting my driver's license. So what I want you to do is, as always, this is I can't emphasize enough. As always, I really want you to focus on the meaning. Again, the context. It's muy importante, the meaning. And then we'll figure out the uses of the preterite versus the imperfect. And then after this, honestly, you'll probably have a good enough grasp to get through the rest of your Spanish requirement. Recibir mi licencia de conducir. Cuando tenía 16 años, yo recibí mi licencia de conducir. Okay, chicos, we have two verbs here, tenía and recibí. The first thing I want you to do, and you can do this in your notes, is identify which tense are we using here. What tense is tenía in, the pretérito or the imperfecto? It ends in ia, so this is the imperfecto. And go ahead and label this in your notes. Okay, and then the next verb, recibí. This accent on the I, recibí, is that the pretérito or imperfecto? And that's the pretérito. So go ahead and label it. Okay, so it's good that we can recognize. Some students aren't even polished enough in their grammar to recognize the difference between the tenses, even when the verbs are conjugated for you. So if you are struggling with even just recognizing which tense is which, go ahead and look on the handout that I gave you and go ahead and through all those bold-faced verbs and label them I or P, and then come back to this tutorial, this presentation, and see if you at least can recognize the tenses, see if you got them right. Because now I'm going to explain why we're using the preterite and the imperfect simultaneously here, because actually there's some rules here, and once we recognize those rules in context, then you can apply them to your homework and ultimately the test. Okay, so tenía. Tenía is the imperfect form of what infinitive? Tener, okay? And you might want to put this in your chart on the second page of that document. Tener plus 16 años is expressing what? Age, okay? And very rarely can I say always about grammar in Spanish, but I can tell you right now, if you have the verb tener and you have a number with años, like 58 años, or 2 años, or 26 años, you're going to use tenía. We always use tener to express age, and when we express age in the past, we use tenía. Now, if you're thinking critically, you might be wondering, that's not a habitual, ongoing, continuous, repeated action that you first identified were the uses of the imperfect. This is an exception to the rule. So you might think, wait a second, 16 years old is very specific. Wouldn't you use the preterite? But this is an exception to a rule, and this is a rule. So you need to memorize that rule. And it's not a hard one to memorize. That tener, we use the imperfect tenía with age. Let's take a look at the preterite. Recibí comes from the verb recibir. What do we use the preterite for? Specific actions completed one time in the past. So reflect on your outside knowledge of you getting your driver's license in the United States. You take a test and you either pass it and get your license or you don't. And some of you all may or may not have passed it, but that experience is pretty significant in our life. And you know that that's a one-time thing. If you don't pass it, you don't get your license. But when you do pass it, you do get your license. And that's only one time. You only have to take it one time. Although some of us should take it more than that. Recibí, the preterite tense, because it's a one-time action completed in the past. Okay. Durante toda mi adolescencia quería conducir. Again, Imperfecto or pretérito. Quería. Imperfecto, ¿no? Imperfecto, ¿por qué? Quería comes from what infinitive? Querer. And we learned last chapter that querer is a verb that changes meaning in the preterite tense. So if this was the preterite, it would mean to try or to refuse. Based on the context, durante toda mi adolescencia, I'm referring to a huge phase in my life. And right now, the question that I have for you is this expressing refused or tried? No. What does querer mean? It means to want. So when we want to express the idea of wanting something in the past, we use quería in the imperfect. Very rarely will you see querer in the preterite, honestly. When you're speaking Spanish, just say quería in the past if you want to express the idea of wanting anything, which we do much more frequently than tried or refused. Yo practicaba manejar todos los días. Pretérito or imperfecto. Practicaba. So we have aba and ia for our imperfect endings on regular verbs. Practicaba. Manejar todos los días. So why is this the imperfect? Because of this context clue. Todos los días. This indicates more than once. This indicates ongoing, repeated, habitual actions that we did in the past. Remember, the preterite is for one time. Recibí mi licencia de conducir. But practicaba manejar todos los días means I did this action more than once. ¿Entienden? Ok, otro ejemplo muy importante. Antes de tomar el examen, yo estaba lista y un poco nerviosa. Estaba. Imperfecto o pretérito. Aba, imperfecto, ¿no? Pero ¿por qué? Because of the context clue, antes de tomar el examen, I'm referring to how I was feeling up until taking the final, or not final exam, sorry, my driver's test. That's referring to a feeling that was ongoing. There's no clear beginning to that. And when we have emotions stated like that, we're going to use the imperfect. And we know we're talking about emotions because we have lista, ready, nerviosa, nervous. This is how I was feeling prior to the test. And when we want to convey the idea of was anything in Spanish, in the past tense, we can use the imperfect. Was thinking, was singing, was sleeping, was studying, we use the imperfect. Okay, otro ejemplo. Hacía sol, no llovía. Era un día bonito, el tiempo perfecto para conducir. Hacía, llovía, era. Esos tres verbos vienen en qué tiempo? Imperfecto o pretérito. Y los tres son al imperfecto. Hacía de hacer, llovía de llover, era de ser. We just talked about this, in chapter 10, the imperfect irregular of ser, era. So with the imperfect, again, ongoing, repeated, habitual actions in the past, what are we really describing here? Weather. So in your notes on your chart, under imperfecto, you're going to want to write the word weather. And we use the imperfect unless it's a natural disaster. We would use the preterite for a natural disaster, like there was a tornado, in the Midwest last week. Hubo un tornado, okay? Unless it's a natural disaster, when we describe, emphasis on describing, when we describe, we use the imperfect tense because descriptions are totally ongoing. Descriptions are never just, beginning and ending over specific, completed in the past. They're ongoing. So some context clues. The word sol, we know, has to do with weather. We might recognize llovía, and we also have this adjective bonito. So these are the kind of things you're going to want to look for when you're doing your homework and when you're taking the test, these context clues. Oh, I'm describing the weather. I'm going to use the imperfect. That's how you want to think. Ok, otro ejemplo muy importante. Eran las 4 de la tarde cuando el examen empezó. Ok, empecemos con los tiempos. Eran, empezó. Los dos verbos vienen en tensos diferentes. ¿Cuál verbo viene en el imperfecto? Eran, ¿no? Y después empezó pretérito. But why? There's lots of reasons why here. One reason that's very easy to identify once you've learned this rule is that when we state what time it was in Spanish in the past, we use the imperfect. So under el imperfecto in your chart, go ahead and write time, and we use ser. So we would say, like, era la una de la tarde if we wanted to express time in the past. Again, just like age, you're probably thinking, what? I thought we used the predicate for specific actions, and clock on the wall time is pretty specific, but it's just a rule. It's an exception to the rule. So make sure, if it's anytime around 1 o'clock, you use era. But when it's, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, 6 o'clock, we're going to use eran, the plural of era, and the imperfect. And this is a rule, okay? So you have to memorize it, which is why you should be putting it in your chart. Okay, so the other verb, empezó, is in the preterite. And it's important to note why this verb is in the preterite. We're saying it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the test started. Empezó means started, and the verb start, unless you're saying was starting, which we very rarely say. We usually say, like, class started at, 10, or the party started at 8. That action of starting is a one-time completed action in the past. So when we use verbs like terminar and empezar, they're typically in the preterite, to start, to end, because they happen and they're over one time, okay? Primero me subí al carro, and I'm just going to go through the next sequence kind of quickly. Primero me subí al carro. Después prendí el carro con la llave. En el carro, el examinador me preguntó, ¿está lista? Yo le dije sí y empecé a manejar el carro. Now, I just went through these 4 sentences quickly. Why? Because all the verbs are in the same tense. What tense are all these verbs in, whether they're regular or irregular? Pretérito, okay? Why? It's simple. The preterite is used for specific actions completed one time in the past. And in these particular slides or sentences, I'm saying first, me subí al carro. Después, prendí el carro. I could say luego. Por último, when you see, you could put this on the preterite side, when you see sequencing words like primero, luego, después, por último, finalmente, things like that, we're going to use the preterite. So whenever you see sequencing words, be sure to use the preterite tense. Also, if you notice when you look in your notes in the handout, I'm telling a story. And where am I in the story? I'm in the climax of the story. A good story has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And in the body, we have a climax, the events that took place. The introduction is where we give background information, and you can see lots of imperfect tense verbs in the beginning of the story. But when you get to the body and the conclusion, you'll notice already there's lots of verbs in the preterite. And that's deliberate, based on storytelling and the uses of the two tenses. Otro ejemplo. Conduje por el centro de la ciudad observando los semáforos y la velocidad. In this sentence, our verb is conduje. ¿Y cuál tiempo tenemos? ¿El imperfecto o el pretérito? Es el pretérito. ¿De qué verbo? De conducir. Conducir es irregular in el pretérito. So even though this is a new vocabulary word, you need to know it's irregular preterite tense conjugation. If it was the imperfect, it's regular. The imperfect only has really 2 irregular verbs. But as we learn more uses of the preterite tense, we might see more verbs that are irregular. This verb, though, is kind of like irregular like the verb decir, which is a verb you already know. Notice it has a J, E, and its yo form just like the yo form of the preterite tense of decir, dije. Conduje is in the preterite Y because I'm talking about the events that took place on the day of my driver's test, one time specific actions completed in the past. Otro ejemplo. Yo manejaba muy bien cuando otro carro me pasó rápidamente. Inmediatamente yo puse los frenos. Okay? Here we have tres verbos diferentes. Manejaba, pasó, and puse. ¿Cuál es el verbo en el imperfecto? Manejaba. Y pasó y puse pretérito, ¿no? So make sure you're able to at least recognize that at this point because you'll be required to produce that in your homework and on the test. But why? There's a couple of reasons why. First of all, yo manejaba muy bien cuando is saying what I was doing, okay? Manejaba. And I like to use kind of like a squiggly line to indicate this action. Manejaba. This is the ongoing action. But then cuando means when. When another car passed me quickly and immediately I put on the brakes. So when we have those verbs in the preterite, I like to use an X to indicate that these two actions interrupted what I was doing. And I call this a cuando sandwich. And when we have a cuando sandwich, you have a verb in the imperfect, and then cuando, and then we have a verb in the preterite. And this happens when we have an ongoing action that's interrupted by a specific action completed in the past. For example, I was studying when my roommate got home, or the children were sleeping when the alarm went off or the dog started barking, things like that. What an action in progress when something happened. That's called a cuando sandwich and perfect cuando preterite. El examinador no estaba contento. Estaba imperfecto, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Contento. Descripción. Después tuve que hacer la parte más difícil, estacionar el carro en paralelo. Most of us, not everybody, I found out when I present this in class, had to do the parallel parking portion of their driver's test, but those of us who live in Charleston know that you can't pass a driver's test in Charleston without learning how to parallel park, since that's something we do a lot here. Again, we're using tuve, pretérito. Why? Because, first of all, we have the sequencing word después, indicating a series of events that took place in the past, one time. And this is specific. This is a very specific part of the driver's test that I had to do and a lot of you had to do. So we use the preterite. Tener, irregular. Antes no tenía problemas estacionar en paralelo, pero aquel día tuve un problema malo. Tenía and tuve. Tener. Imperfecto, pretérito. Pero, ¿por qué? All right, so both verbs come from tener, but they're in different tenses. Why? Because first, our sentence starts off with antes, earlier, prior to, indicating repeated, ongoing, habitual, general. I didn't have problems, indicating that I practiced enough, and when I did, I didn't have problems. So that's more than one time. But then we have this context clue, aquel día, which means what? That day. Very specific reference to the past, and so we have to change our verb tener from tenía to tuve. So be very careful when you do this on the super site and pay close attention to those very important context clues that determine which tense you use. Yo estacionaba en paralelo cuando choqué con un carro estacionado. Otra palabra de vocabulario, ¿no? Chocar. Chocar es irregular en la forma de yo del pretérito, ¿no? CAR verbs change to QUE. So this verb's in the preterite. Estacionaba imperfecto. But why? Do you notice anything? Do you see any clues or hints as to why we'd have imperfect cuando and then preterite? What is this saying? This is saying that I was doing something, parking, parallel parking, when an action occurred. I crashed into another car. That part is a little exaggerated. You'll see why here in a second. But to clarify, ongoing action imperfect, interrupting action preterite, sandwiched with cuando. Inmediatamente el examinador se bajó del carro y examinó el otro carro. Se bajó y examinó. Pretérito, ¿no? ¿Por qué? One-time completed actions that occurred in the past tense. We use the preterite tense for that. And inmediatamente, that definitely indicates that just something suddenly. Sorry, I repeat inmediatamente again here, bad writing, but whatever. Me puse muy nerviosa. Okay, so earlier I used estaba, el imperfecto con nerviosa, but here, oops, I've changed it to me puse pretérito, because I'm not using the verb estar to state how I was feeling. Me puse, poner has lots of different uses. Even ponerse has lots of different uses. We saw it in the chapter with clothing, like I put on my sweater when it's cold. Me pongo el suéter cuando hace frío. But also ponerse with an adjective, like nerviosa, means to become. And we become something, that's definitely preterite, because we were feeling a certain way and then it changed. And that indicates a one-time interrupting, like sudden action, which is the preterite. Me puse muy nerviosa. Pero él me dijo, está bien, era la cuneta. So dijo and era. And these verbs, we have imperfect, and dijo is preterite. So a lot of times, unless we're saying used to say, decía, like my grandfather used to say, blah, blah, blah. Mi abuelo decía, siempre decía, that we would use the imperfect. But when we see something in quotes, we typically use decir in the preterite. Dijo, yo le dije, nosotros te dijimos, the preterite in quotes. And we have era, the verb ser, in the imperfect, because I'm saying that, it was the curb. That curb has been there all along. So when we describe what was there in the past, we're going to use the imperfect because that's ongoing. Okay, dos verbos más. Entonces, chicos, se subió al carro y en el carro escribió algo. Pretérito, pretérito. And hopefully now you're like, I get this. We have entonces, a sequencing word, these completed actions leading up to the end of the story that happened one time on that day when she got her driver's test. Or got her driver's license. Me dio el examen, yo saqué 70%, that part's true, I barely passed, en el examen. Y recibí mi licencia. Dio, saqué, recibí, pretérito. Porque completed actions in the past, specific, that one time, that one day. Fue una experiencia de suspensa, pero buena. Now, I know this is a long presentation and I know you're exhausted, but please listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to determine getting answers right or wrong from this point forward in Spanish. So listen carefully and put this in your notes. Under the preterite side, we use this verb fue, which a lot of times we think is ir in the preterite, but actually fue, in this case, fue una experiencia de suspensa. It was a suspenseful experience. Was, ser. We use ser in the imperfect typically when we're narrating in the past because we're describing, and you can put that under the imperfect side. Ser, describing, imperfect, okay? However, we're not describing here. We are summarizing an event. And it's really important that you note this in your chart. Fue plus an adjective, or like fue difícil, or fue fácil, or fue, muy divertida la fiesta anoche. When we summarize an event, and that event could be a celebration, like la boda, or it could be your final exam, like un examen fue difícil. Where do we see this use of ser in the preterite in this story? In the conclusion, because that's what we do. In the conclusion, we summarize the event, we tie up the loose ends. So make sure you note that and apply that as you proceed. And, someday, hopefully, are really and truly able to narrate the past in Spanish.